Okay, welcome everyone officially to Inclusion Actions in the Classroom with the Grad Academy. This workshop is also being offered in partnership with the Teaching and Learning Commons. So I want to pass it off to my colleague Julie for a moment to share some about that.
Hi, everyone. I'm Julie Cohen. I'm with the Teaching and Learning Commons. We're so happy to partner in this event, and I'm really happy to see and work with graduate students, and just wanted to kind of let grad students know that a lot of the TLC programs and workshops are open to grad students as well. So definitely keep an eye out for things coming out of the TLC. We generally share most of our information through a variety of ways, but I'm going to throw into the chat here our website and some of our a link to some of our upcoming events. But yeah, thank you so much for being here, and I'm really looking forward to a great conversation today.
Thank you so much, Julie. Thank you for sharing about the resources and support that both students and faculty can access. Much appreciated. So I will go ahead and kick things off for our workshop today. Joining us as panelists, we have Dr. Cameron Coleman, Assistant Professor in Residence in Teaching and Learning. We have Dr. Sophie Ladd, Associate Professor in Residence with Teaching and Learning. We have Dr. Blanca Rincon, Associate Professor in Educational Psychology, Leadership, and Higher Education. And we have Dr. Ted Wiseman, who is the Digital Teaching Manager for Online Education. So a great group with lots of different perspectives on this topic. And I will be moderating throughout. So to get us started, I would just love to have our panelists share a little bit more about themselves, add to that introduction as much as you would like about your role at UNLV and your background as it relates to teaching and education. So I see Dr. Ladd first on my screen. Would you like to kick us off?
I sure can. Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Sophie Ladd. I am, as Alyssa mentioned, faculty in residence in the College of Education. So my role is primarily teaching and service. So a lot of my work focuses on the use of children's and young adult literature to promote elementary literacy skills within schools, but from a culturally responsive perspective, and understanding that literacy is not a single practice, but rather a practice that is embedded in who we are and what we bring to our school spaces. So that's really a big part of who I am. I think that's about the brief introduction. Happy to always connect with you all outside of this conversation today as well. So hi.
Wonderful. Thank you again for being here. And Dr. Coleman.
Hi, good morning. My name is Dr. Cameron Coleman, and like Dr. Ladd, I'm an assistant professor, faculty in residence of teacher education here in the Department of Teaching and Learning. And what I do is I primarily teach in-service and pre-service teachers. I share content agnostic research with them as it relates to pedagogy. And we talk about the students and the ecologies or the spaces in which they find themselves and how we can engage that to really strengthen and inform our pedagogy. And I also do a lot of work in helping our teachers develop a more reflective disposition informed by research and theories. And prior to arriving at UNLV, I taught for about 20 years in public, private, and charter school spaces. And I was primarily a teacher leader with mentor teacher, curriculum leads, instructional leadership team. And when I left the classroom, I was serving in the role of master math teacher in Detroit Public Schools. So I'm thrilled to be here, and I absolutely love what I do.
Thank you so much. So wonderful to have your robust experience and background as part of this conversation. Thank you again for joining us. And Dr. Rincon, would you mind sharing a brief introduction?
Sure, and I apologize for arriving a little late. I'm having some tech challenges. My computer is here and I'm using another computer. So my introduction would be I'm an assistant professor of higher education here in the College of Education. I teach in the college teaching seminar for the graduate teaching certificate for the graduate college. I also have coordinated the culturally relevant responsive teaching fellows program through the College of Engineering for the last 5 years. And I'm currently the PI and director of the HSI Hub, which is really focused on supporting STEM faculty development around culturally relevant responsive teaching and nationwide at HSIs and EHSIs.
Thank you so very much. Really appreciate your joining this conversation and sharing your perspectives as well. Much appreciated. And last but not least, Dr. Wiseman.
Okay. So my background, I came to teaching through actually later in life. So I was alternative route to licensure teacher, started about 16 years ago. And I found myself teaching elementary education and working my way up through middle school. I left the classroom. So I worked in public schools for 11 years in a variety of roles, elementary, middle school, and then also as an administrator outside of the classroom. And then I transitioned to higher education. My PhD is in teacher education. And my job is I'm the digital teaching manager. And I guess the best way to describe it is I support any faculty teaching online or any online modality. And my goal, how it kind of relates to this, is that students are students where they show up and how they show up in a variety of spaces. And our job is to figure out how to meet students where they're at. And especially as we navigate an online learning environment, it's different. And so my job is just to support faculty to meet students. And then I also do teach with the College of Education their second year seminar. So I'm a part-time faculty as well. And I'm just happy to be here. And I love what the Grad College does and all the events that they do and support just teaching across the board. So always happy to be here and help.
Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate your joining this conversation as well. I think keeping the online environment in mind, needs to be a part of this kind of conversation too. So much appreciated. Thank you all again for joining us. So audience members, students, faculty on the call, I just want to invite you again to voice your questions or type them in the chat throughout this conversation. We'll be sure to address them. But I'm going to get started with a first question for our panelists. And panelists, please feel welcome to jump in, whoever would like to speak first. But in your words, how do you describe belongingness in the classroom? What can educators do to foster a sense of belonging among students with different backgrounds? So broad entry to this conversation, but please share your thoughts.
I'm never scared to go first. And I know that's a little weird. I think belonging starts with being human, and showing vulnerability and being aware of the dynamics that are created automatically in a classroom. I'm very fortunate with the course that I teach, where we use something called touchstones as a discussion method. And it really kind of constructs a classroom where students sit in a circle, you tell personal, you are not, the way that I promote it the best to kind of distill it down is I am genuine in how I speak, and I speak from my own experience without it being like talking down. I use it more as an entry point to allow other students and ask them questions. So I guess the way that I foster it is I show up, I'm open, I'm honest, I'm genuine, I try to be, and allow students space to be critical. And not, and I think maybe the other part is ego. kind of checking ego a little bit, you know, not feeling like you have all the answers. So that's one of the things that I do, and just being open to the students, kind of being smart and intelligent people who have a lot that they bring to the table.
Thank you for kicking us off. Yes, Dr. Rincon.
Yeah, so in higher education, we draw a lot on Terrell Strayhorn's work around sense of belonging. And he talks about this basic human need that we all have to feel like we matter, right, to other folks. And in the classroom space, that our experiences, that our backgrounds, that our knowledge, that our abilities are valued, right? And some of my work, my scholarship, my research side looks a lot at like these belonging cues that that students, that we all engage in, right? Like these verbal and nonverbal belonging cues that signal to folks that they belong in a space. So I think about it in the relation from the perspective of a faculty. It's the things that we do to foster and don't do, right? And what and how we teach that foster this sense of belonging for different groups of students. Like, do they see themselves reflected in the curriculum, for example? Do we think about the vast varieties of prior knowledge that students are bringing, the past experiences? In higher education, most folks are at the graduate level, so those professional experiences, and how do we bring them and leverage them in the classroom? I also think there's, when we think about the sense of belonging, especially for folks who may have more marginalized positions in higher education, we have to think about building like a sense of trust, right? That the classroom space is a safe space. And I would say that a fully safe space is probably difficult to create, but I do think that having them trust that you will intervene if there's ever something that comes up in the classroom, and that you will address behaviors in the classroom that may challenge their sense of safety and belonging in the class. So I think that's kind of one of the things that I keep in mind, is not just the relationships I'm building with students, the content, how I'm teaching, that it addresses a wide variety of learners in the classroom, and that ultimately that I have the responsibility as the instructor to ensure that students feel safe and that they can trust me to intervene if and when it's needed.
I'll chime in because mine is kind of connected to yours, specifically to belonging from what we know about literature that we grew up with. It's predominantly white characters, a mom, a dad, a brother, and a sister. And so one of the entry points I do, just to foster a sense of belonging straight out of the gate when I teach classes, and it's specifically for pre-service and in-service teachers, is to understand their literacy histories. Did they see themselves in the books that they were read to, or that they read when they were young people? And understanding that teaching skills is secondary to validating and celebrating who they are as individuals. So I actually have like a whole stack of children's literature sitting on my desk, just because oftentimes, especially I'll date myself, as a child of the 80s, there were not Black characters in books. There were not Latina characters. Homelessness, poverty, LGBTQ issues were not published in children's literature. And up until the last 10 years or so, literature is predominantly white. And so my entry point is always providing rich text sets and saying, what did you read and what was missing, what was there, who was represented, who wasn't. And if you know Bishop's work, it's focused on mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. Who do we see in the books? Do we see ourselves as a mirror? Do we have windows where we can look from the outside in to understand other people's experiences that are not similar to ours? And then sliding glass doors as entry points to then welcome ourselves into other spaces and welcome others. So that's kind of my center of belongingness, is really around like the resources that I bring in and understanding where we come from. So, and also Goldie Mohammed's work is really integral part of our literacy teaching as well, because she really introduces this notion of cultural capital and literacy within the funds that we bring from our own experiences, and that we all have literacy stories, whether they're good or bad or indifferent, we bring those to our experiences in the classroom. So that's me.
I'm glad you said that, Dr. Ladd, because I'm here with my citations and I'm wondering, I'm like, should I just jump in with the articles right away? But I mean, I did take a look at what belongingness looks like in some older literature. And so, Maslow, 1943, with the pyramid of needs, and establishing belongingness is something that is an integral part towards self-actualization. But preceding that belongingness level in Maslow, you look at our other needs met, such as food and water. Do the students have relationships? And so I think for me, when I keep that in mind as maybe the first reference to belongingness, I'm saying, have I looked at the school environment? Do I know some of the patterns? Do I keep snacks in my classroom? Recognizing that there are going to be some things that students will need. I think that will help them to be seen. I also read some other literature that broke down belongingness as the need to feel accepted, recognized, valued, and appreciated. And so to that end, there is a seminal article called Teachers, Please Learn Our Names by Coley and Solorzano. And so maybe the first entry point to not only not doing damage, but also to showing that there is effort placed on knowing who the students are is really learning their names and not asking to abbreviate names or assigning any abbreviations that the students did not ask for, because what that article showed through the words of the students themselves was that there was racial harm done over time, where they felt not only further and further away from belonging in a classroom, but just over time not feeling that they belonged in school, that school and the educative space is not for them because their names don't matter, their names as a marker of histories that they're carrying with them. And so for me, belongingness looks like kind of from a perspective of what the school space looks like looking at some patterns in the school, making sure that the names are learned, and also making sure that there's some sort of physical aspect of a classroom that shows belonging, so that there are groups, that there are places where people can be together, and that's expected. And knowing that that can shift based on what you're observing in the students as well. So there's a physical component to that. I did also take a look at actually a book that I had read when I was a math teacher called Motivation by Ilana Horn. So although it is math specific, there is a great tool towards a belongingness audit. So I'll put that here in the chat, where there's a checklist where teachers can ask themselves about the physical space of the classroom and other things that would be included in a child study as well, towards making sure that all students have been recognized, valued, accepted as a part of their belonging in the school environment.
Thank you so much. I feel like learning so much already from you all. And I also am going to share a few links to for everyone in the group here that Dr. Ladd has shared as well. So lots of resources to explore already. And that is a perfect segue into my next question, which we've kind of begun on with Dr. Ladd and Dr. Coleman. But I welcome you to add anything, and for Dr. Wiseman and Dr. Rincon to share their thoughts as well. The next question: how can the materials and learning resources that educators choose influence students' ability to see themselves in the learning process? And what strategies can be used to ensure that they reflect diverse perspectives? So definitely have touched on that a bit already, but Dr. Rincon or Dr. Wiseman, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think one tool that I really like and that we use in our faculty PD is, I would drop in the link, but I don't have it. It's on my other computer. But USC Center for Urban Education has a syllabus equity edit audit tool that I think is really useful. And it asks questions like, does my syllabus represent a variety of perspectives? It asks you to question things like your tone, like really kind of interrogating how you position students in the syllabus, right? As like a first step when engaging in some of this work. I also think something that I try to do is I try to have an incomplete syllabus at the beginning of the semester. And I say that because it's a little scary when you're first teaching to do that. But I like students to be able to contribute. And I don't want to assume what identities or experiences they have that they um, identify with or value, right? Some of this I can do by like collecting some of that information on the first day of class, before class starts. But I always think about like how I'm providing opportunities for students to input and have agency in the classroom. And part of that is helping kind of shape that curriculum. Um, I think you can also do this in a variety of smaller ways, right? If you don't feel comfortable yet, um, allowing I think or when I first started teaching, it was all about control, right? What could I control? Because it was scary for me. But I think you can think about it in like smaller ways, through like initial activities on the first day of class where you're learning about students and how you incorporate their experiences. One thing that I like to do that I've continued to do since I started teaching 10, 11 years ago, um, is that I have students write these name cards, and part of the name cards is like, what's your name on my roster? What do you want me to call you? But one of the things I really like to do is ask them for a DJ request, right? And I tell them that in another life I was a DJ, and and I'd like to live that out in the classroom. And so they share some music, and I play it at the beginning of class and during breaks. And it's just really fun to kind of like, I'll be like, this goes out to so and so. I really play that role for them. I think it humanizes me as an instructor, but it allows folks to learn a little bit about themselves. They always, are surprised at like the different music choices, and students often will, share music that is new for the community. It's sometimes in a different language, and they'll share kind of why they selected it. And so it's really fun, I think, way to kind of have students contribute to the classroom environment and foster that sense of belonging for everyone.
That sounds like so much fun. It's a fabulous idea. Thank you so much. Uh, Dr. Wiseman, did you have anything you'd like to add to
Yeah,
that?
a couple things. So number one, very early on, since like I said, I non-traditional route to teaching. But one thing that always resonated with me was the concept of differentiation. And it like just made sense. People learn differently. And it's not just the actual learning, but their experience of learning, right? Like it's not just whether or not you learn math differently, but where you come from, how you learn math, what you do, all of those things. And understanding that you have diverse learners and how you need to meet them in not just in the area of content, right? So it's about meeting them with their personalities, with their backgrounds, with all of their things. And so differentiation was always something to me that just kind of resonated at an elementary level. And it's so much easier, and maybe for me it was always easier in like K-12, like duh, everybody needs to like, not everybody's at the same place, right? You're teaching fourth grade reading, people are at all different levels, right? So I got to help this group here and this group. And so but then also not really making anybody feel bad for where they were, because not everybody had the same support or things like that. So providing that kind of platform and being the person that fostered and promoted that like growth mindset with students, like awesome job, like that was good for this group and that group. The other thing that I would also say, in the online space, we have something called the community of inquiry. So I'm very fortunate to be here with very smart people, Dr. Coleman, Dr. Rincon, and Dr. Ladd, who can quote a lot of literature. I'm more of a practical person, and so but in the community of inquiry, there's something called the teacher presence, right? There's a social presence. And then the teacher presence is how you show up in an online course. And if you don't realize in an online space, students don't know you. Like you are a amorphous thing so put a video of yourself. Dr. Ladd and I have worked on this in her course specifically, something that's a little more representative of her in her course, right? And other faculty members, whether it's avatars or images and things that you put in the class that represent a diverse group of people. And it's really important that you show up in your personality, your tone, the way that you respond, how you give feedback. For example, we all know that if I write in capital letters, it sounds like I'm yelling, right? And so when you write feedback, you can record feedback and it comes through in your voice and the inflection and things like that. And I know for me, my introduction that I do is actually a slide of like things that has my family on it, the things that I'm interested in. We do a thing where people post a picture of something meaningful and they describe why, similar to Dr. Rincone's song, and you get to get a little bit of a personality. And I think what I'd like to highlight in that if you teach in any sort of online modality, if you don't create that sense of belonging and an opportunity for students to engage and demonstrate their personality and your personality, then you're missing a lot, right? Like it is going to be very challenging for students to do content and do other things because we take for granted that in the in-person space, they come in, they see me, they meet me, I say hello, I have a personality, and online there isn't one unless you create it. So I think it's very important to acknowledge that. And then that's where it opens up to that diversity, that belonging, all of the things that were shared by the rest of the group.
Thank you so much. It's, yeah, fascinating to hear just the different outlook from the online perspective, and that's so helpful. Thank you. Before we officially move on from this question, Dr. Ladd and Dr. Coleman, I just wanted to pose it to you one more time if you had anything else to say about resources and materials and the impact.
I think this can be hard as new faculty, but one of the things that I do in my literacy courses is I offer multiple avenues for readings. So we may be discussing comprehension. And so I might offer different readings and articles that support comprehension where students can self-select what they're most interested in, all the while still understanding about what comprehension is. It does take a bit of additional planning and preparation, but if we're truly trying to meet our students where they're at, if I know that I'm teaching pre-service teachers that are going to teach anywhere from kindergarten all the way up to 8th grade, they may not want to read about who, what, when, where, and why questions. They may want to read more about like critical perspectives that they can engage their middle schoolers in dissecting, young adult literature. So I think if we can take the time to identify materials that still meet the common goal of my example of understanding comprehension, but also serve them in a space that they know they're going to need, then we have that opportunity to really engage in meeting them right where they're at. So it's not just about the books that I select, but also the scholarly resources. We can give choice, it takes time, but if we do that, feedback as instructors really is solid around that because they feel like they see themselves in the choices that they get to make during their academic learning. We know that schools typically are top down. We think about banking concepts. You're just there to learn and I'm going to tell you everything I know. But if we can open that space up to have that more project-based selective choice, then we have real opportunities. I also, we had a really rich discussion. Dr. Coleman and I were working with part-time instructors, and our colleague, Dr. Morales, suggested using Cite Black Women because we often misunderstand students navigating, and this is resource-based too in our coursework, but navigating the complexities of citing in our work, writing papers can be so challenging. And sometimes students feel penalized because they don't understand that. But when we go to sources and we explain why it's so important to cite works of that reflect people's work and looking at these resources, that's been something that's really been engaging in our conversations about students don't intentionally make mistakes about citing or APA format or taking things from ChatGPT. They might just not know how to properly do that. And that seems to be something that's come to the surface in all of our undergrad and graduate classes. So even though there are two different conversations, the whole idea here is that the resources we provide really center the student in ways that help them grow and develop versus penalizing them for things they don't know or that they don't understand in the complexities of higher education, because it's its own learning system. It's its own space that we have to understand. And so that's just kind of some extra added comments, I guess.
I did want to add something, but I want to make sure I'm addressing the question. Were you asking specifically about resources and materials?
Yes, resources and materials, and kind of different strategies to allow students to feel reflected in different perspectives.
Okay. So I have, I guess, two approaches to that. One of the things that I looked at as a doc student was some responses of children to culturally concordant educational media. So basically what I did was I had some samples of educational media animated for young children, and asked the parents and the students what it is they noticed when they were phenotypically represented. So when there was a color match, a skin match, and what I found with my little doc research was that all the students really looked at hair. They noticed when the hair type matched them. They noticed even if the academic takeaways were weak, they noticed that there was someone who looked like them. And I guess the way that I bring that forth in my pedagogy is I make sure that I show media or video that actually looks like my students, because everyone gets a chance to see themselves knowing something or in an informational context, and not necessarily being the sidekick or someone who's kind of providing some humor. There's a chance for everyone to be the knowledge haver, I guess, the person who's centered in that. So where there are resources curricularly for books and whatnot, I found that I like to intentionally supplement that by looking around and making sure that there's a phenotypic and where I can a culture match so that everyone has a voice in those concepts pedagogically. I guess as a practice to that, it's made me wonder how I can engage prior knowledge and making sure that I ask a question that everyone can sink their teeth into, because education is something where we're really pulling out of students. And to reference Dr. Ladd, I know there's a way of our thinking that we're banking students and, oh my gosh, with pacing we have to get this far and whatnot. But even the Latin roots of education mean that we're pulling something out of students. We're really trying to build upon what it is they have, and every student in there has something. So just looking at prior knowledge from an asset-based perspective and not a deficit-based one is a practice that we can work towards.
Thank you all so much. So many different strategies were just shared with our audience here. And so I'd like to talk about student outcomes. So what do we know about how creating or fostering these inclusive environments, including resources, what do we know about how those ultimately will impact student outcomes? Whoever would like to jump in.
I guess once again, not scared of first. I think by doing a lot of this, you're showing that you care. Like if you come into a classroom and you make an effort to acknowledge students where they're at, you recognize the differences, don't look at them as deficits, to the point that Dr. Coleman was making, and that has been made, is that the differences are not bad. They help, make a more robust and interesting class. And I think if you start the class with an openness, and I even think with Dr. Rincone's thing with the song, it's relatable, it's connective, it is something that it's a low barrier. Like nobody needs to, I don't need to be like have any like special knowledge to like a song, right? Like I think we forget about that, that we need access points, and it doesn't always need to be content, and people might be scared to share or whatever, and you need to create that opportunity that is a low threshold for students to engage with you. And if you do all that stuff early on, what will happen is students will know that you care. They will potentially work harder for you. You have recognized them earlier. It's not just a like you only contact them when you need something from them. I think there's like feed forward, and you try to promote student success, you scaffold and you engage. And the more engaged you are early on and acknowledging them, then I think ultimately that leads to student success. Because if the only time that you're interacting with students is in grading or in giving lectures or in doing things, then students are not going to see themselves, they're not going to care because you don't care. So I think all the stuff that has been mentioned is really representative of people who care about the practice of teaching and really believe in educating and promoting student success. So because you don't do all the things that have been mentioned if you don't want your students to be successful. So that's kind of my take.
I will add on to that. I did look into some of how belongingness was parsed apart, and I found that there was a lot of discussion of socio-emotional learning within belongingness research. And so when I dug into what it looks like for teachers to really increase their capacity to, teach in a way that brings down their affective filter. Actually, Dr. Carrie Coca, our colleague, does a lot of research on what it looks like to have an affective pedagogical goal, meaning teach in a way that acknowledges students' emotions in the room, especially when you are teaching from a dominant narrative and there's students who are marginalized identities looking at things happening in a math classroom. When you teach in a way that acknowledges the affective filter, you're going to have more positive student outcomes. So I'm saying it all to say that I've looked at research that acknowledges a socio-emotional component. And I'm just going to put something here that talks about higher levels of school functioning in terms of attendance, whether it's homework completion, grades, and scores. It also leads to building better socio-emotional skills in the students themselves and promoting student engagement. And so that correlates with Dr. Ilana Horn from the book Motivated. So although there are, we can read the research and say, we can parse apart how these things are defined, it looks like there are some demonstrable student outcomes that even if we take it away from grades and test scores, like there's more participation, it seems like there's more investment if I had to sum that up.
And I will say, just based on the question, it says, like, what does student feedback play in improving inclusive practices in the classroom? We as professors, we get inundated with grading, but one of the ways that students know and feel that we've read and understand their work is by giving them feedback. And so some of the things that I know, especially in my teaching role, is just by quickly commenting, I appreciate your work. Thank you for submitting this, even if you're delayed in the grading process and it's an elephant in the room, right? Just making sure that your students know and you're communicative about the fact that you're working on grading their papers, you're thinking about their work, and engaging in processes too that don't make grading complex, like using TED is an excellent resource for us as instructors here at UNLV to build interactive rubrics where we have an opportunity for students to really understand what they're being evaluated on too, because part of inclusive assessment of student learning is also having students understand what our expectations are of their learning, but also helping them articulate what their needs are. So if they didn't do well on an assignment, giving them the opportunity to rework and relearn, because we're not here to punish, but rather to support them in engaging in their learning process. So just thinking about the nuts and bolts of grading, that's really helpful, as well as providing thoughtful feedback, having tangible ways that they understand and know what we are expecting of them is truly important.
So the higher ed literature has looked a lot at like how students respond to like sense of belonging measures and its association with things like higher grades, right? So students who have a higher sense of belonging, get higher grades in the classroom. We can debate whether or not that's something that's meaningful, right? But we also see it associated with things like student retention, student completion, student retention in their majors, right? So sense of belonging is actually a really powerful way of thinking about addressing student needs in the classroom. And I wanted to build off on two things that Dr. Coleman shared around like prior knowledge. We know that, eliciting students' prior knowledge leads to deeper learning, right? We also know that eliciting emotion leads to greater retention of information, right? So all of these things that we do to try to foster a sense of belonging have been found to lead to things that improve student learning in the classroom and ultimately retention in higher education.
Thank you all so much. Really appreciate the volume of resources being shared here. And for those on the call, we're going to collect these links and make sure you all have them in an email afterwards as well. And thank you, Dr. Coleman, for addressing Destiny's question in the chat as well. So we are rolling right along here. I want to pose to our audience just one more time a reminder: if you have any questions, you're welcome to type them in the chat or raise your hand, and we can look to those. But I think one thing that we have maybe touched on peripherally but not really focused on is how do you decide what your students need? So how can instructors assess student needs, whether it's different styles of learning, different backgrounds? How do you look at that early on and throughout the progression of your class?
I think I might have jumped ahead a question when I was talking about like the assessment and rubrics and things like that. But one of the things that I do is just, especially when I'm teaching online, I'll just send a quick announcement that says, how are you feeling? What are the things that are helpful in the course? What are the things that you need from me? And it may seem like a simple task, but just offering a space to say, hey, I'm here and I see you and I hear you. What can I do to support you? That has been really helpful in my online instruction. And even in my in-person instruction, handing out just a note card and saying, tell me how you're feeling right now. And it doesn't have to be about the content of the course. Oftentimes when we get to like the third week of the semester, fourth week of the semester, students are feeling really overwhelmed, especially our pre-service teachers who are student teaching. They're feeling the world is just closing in on them. And fostering a sense of belonging is also important, just to ask, how are you feeling? How can I support you as a person? Because in these spaces, they need to know that their human sides and needs are being met, which Dr. Coleman talked about earlier. Content is secondary. In all fairness, we're all invested in our content, but if our personal needs are not met, it's impossible for us to be successful in our classrooms. So doing touch points throughout the semester just to make sure everybody's okay. And if a student says they're not okay, then knowing that there's resources to support them. And then further offering opportunities for you to engage via Zoom or through office hours to just debrief and talk to one another. Those are really important, I find.
Absolutely. And can I piggyback off of that, Dr. Ladd? Asking students how they feel. Something I learned learned about from Dr. Mark Brackett at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. And sometimes people don't know how they feel. Sometimes they don't have the vocabulary to express, especially if you're talking with younger children. They really just they don't have something that's precise. And so in my classes, I have asked some undergrads and graduates, I think I ask everybody, how are you feeling? And can you point to a word that speaks to that? So the mood meter is a tool to do that. And it includes words such as satisfied, focused, nervous, you feel balanced. Like it really pinpoints some words that can speak to emotions, because good, bad, like that's our introduction, and we want people to have a more nuanced and specific way to talk about that. And it's not something that takes a long time in class. It's just something where we say, you feel restless. Oh, okay, well, let's take a deep breath, and hopefully this will be an experience that brings that down. So I guess speaking to affective filter as well. So, taking a beat to ask students how they feel and giving them a tool to express that in a little bit of time, I think it's gone a long way in my pedagogy, no matter where it was, whether it was middle school or whether it's graduate students. And I would also say another thing that I would say is making sure that we are as educators noticing our students and like really honing our observation skills. It's very easy to get wrapped up in, is this work done? But school and learning is more than work. And so I've really had to take stock of my observation skills, and am I noticing the humans who are doing this work, and what is it that I see? What is the body language that's there? And asking myself, what are the nonverbal cues that I can further ask about if I would need to.
I love everything that's been shared, the temperature checks, love that. I think some of the ways that I've kind of gotten feedback from students is at the beginning of class. Again, those little note cards or little index cards that I have them respond to. And I ask them things like, what is something you want to get out of the class? Why are you taking the class or something like that, which gives me a sense of like what they're hoping to learn, and making sure that I take that into consideration or make adjustments to the class. I also will ask them a question like, what is something you want me to know about you? And oftentimes that's when I learn about just different preferences or issues happening, things that might come up in the class. And I think that's really helpful in understanding different learning needs that or factors to consider that may impact student learning. And then one of the things that I think is really, really, really powerful is like a mid-semester assessment as a way to like gauging how things are going in a more formal way. And I go back to my little index cards. I give them a single index card, and in the front, I ask them to say, what's one thing that's going well in the class? What's one thing that could go better? And I let them know that the next time we meet, we'll actually like analyze the data together, and come up with solutions of how to move forward. And I feel like that's a really helpful way for me to understand, like, are those initial needs being met? If not, what are some adjustments we can make? And also having it be kind of like a shared responsibility, right? Like, I am not the purveyor of all knowledge in the classroom. This is our community, and we learn together and from each other, and we have a shared responsibility in deciding how we move forward. So I feel like that's one way that I've been able to kind of be responsive to student learning needs.
I appreciate too that you mentioned that you return to the cards, because sometimes we take that data and we never talk about it. We ask how you're feeling, we ask what we can do, but then as teachers, we sometimes get caught in this space where we're so busy that we don't actually go back and address them. And I think that's a really important part of this piece. If we ask, then we need to be committed to responding to those needs. So if they say they're feeling overwhelmed and they need extra time, do we give that space in our class to take a breath, to talk with their peers about their assignments or even just their outside personal lives? So thanks for saying that. I really appreciate learning alongside of all of you at the same time.
I think this is fantastic because I think what ultimately is being promoted is being reflective in your practice. Like we're still works in progress and we're still trying to figure out like, and I put a link in the, I put a couple links in, and one is a mid-semester review, which you can add into your course automatically, make a quiz, do the thing. I think Dr. Ladd, also said actually do something with the information too. And I think we do that. And it's so interesting, the concept of formative assessment versus summative assessment. We use that term all the time and we throw it around, but you're doing it always. And if you are a conscious, reflective teacher, you are engaging your students and you're like, you know what? It doesn't look like anybody's paying attention right now. Is everything okay? Right? Like, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? I was in a class yesterday. I was subbing for someone and I asked a question and they all sat there and I was like, so everybody's great all the time. Like, this is a wonderful, fantastic thing. And everyone's like, and they start shaking their heads and you kind of and you that's a way of just showing up. And once again, I'll make a distinction. You need to do something online, and that's part of my job is to help you do it online. But I really think that just be willing to ask the questions, right? Every class I had, how was midterms? I started off, or I'll come into class and I'll say, I'm so I'm an over divulger, so I'll just let you know, and it's okay. Last spring, my father-in-law passed away, and I would go into class and I would be like, and all my classes knew, like, because I was like, it was a rough day today. I'm sorry if I'm not at my best. I apologize. Like, I didn't apologize, but I'm like, I'm trying. I'm showing up. You all are the highlight of my day. I'm here because it's fun to interact with you, and you don't realize. I even get a little chills right now. The students, I think, that connection. I was a real person going through something, acknowledging a hard time, letting them know, hey, I'm sorry, to the point about I'm behind on grading. It's because I was in the hospital, like be a real person. And the more that you do that, you let students be themselves as well. You don't know how many people came up to me and were like, I had a similar thing. My father was this, I was dealing with like those experiences. And so I just think it's great, like everyone has said, to learn from this group and then be surrounded by people who are reflective and intentional and ultimately want students to be successful. That's at the heart of all of this, is that realize the way that we learned was different. Things are different now. And when you know better, do better. And that's what we got. And that's where I always try to push people is know better, do better. So
Thank you all so much. And we are getting close to the end of the hour here, so I'm going to go ahead and drop our Grad Academy assessment, our workshop feedback survey in the chat here for all of you on the call, if you wouldn't mind taking a few moments. But before we officially wrap up, I want to thank Dr. Ladd, Dr. Coleman, Dr. Rincon, and Dr. Wiseman for sharing their expertise with us today. And I would like to offer you one last opportunity. If there's anything that was left unsaid, you have a final words of wisdom to share, please take a moment to do so. We really
Thank you for
appreciate
being in
everything.
community with us. We appreciate you sharing space with us. And I know for me, I am an open book. Reach out anytime if you would like help or even opportunities to collaborate. Like we're here for it. So especially as educators, that's our purpose. So thanks for being here. We know you have an hour of time that is invaluable. So thanks.
I also just want to say thank you and, trust yourself, I think. If sometimes you might be like, I'm not sure if, just take risks, trust yourself. And, if you center students and you care for them, you're going to be on the right path.
All of the above.
Perfect. Perfect spot to end. Thank you all so much again, and I hope everybody on the call has a great rest of your day.